regional manager shoved a single dad right in front of the CEO, expecting him to fight back or walk away. Instead, the father ignored the humiliation, rushed toward a silent espresso machine, and did something so unexpected that an entire cafe stopped breathing. What he noticed in those few seconds didn't just expose the truth, it may have saved someone's life. The breakfast rush had swallowed briar and bean coffee long before 8 o'clock. Rain from the early morning still clung to the windows, turning the streets of Dayton into blurred ribbons of gray and yellow. Nurses from the nearby hospital lined up beside paramedics, finishing overnight shifts. Delivery drivers carried steaming cups toward waiting vans. Business people checked emails without looking up. The cafe hummed with the familiar rhythm of grinders, milk steamers, conversations, and clinking mugs. Then everything stopped. Gavin Price shoved Evan Brooks hard enough to send him stumbling sideways into the corner of a wooden table. The impact echoed louder than anyone expected. A heavy tool bag slipped from Evan's shoulder and crashed onto the polished floor. Wrenches scattered. Plastic inspection tags bounced beneath nearby chairs. A small red fabric patch, shaped like an ear, peeled halfway loose from the side of the bag. Across the room, 10-year-old Sadie Brooks froze beside the window where she'd been quietly working on her math homework. Her pencil rolled off the table, but she didn't notice. Every eye turned toward her father. Near the entrance stood Naomi Calder, CEO of Briar and Bean Coffee, accompanied by a human resources director and a quality control specialist. They had arrived only moments earlier, just in time to witness the shove. Gavin straightened his expensive jacket as though nothing unusual had happened. "I've tried being patient," he said loudly enough for nearby customers to hear. "But this contractor refuses to cooperate. We're trying to open this cafe, and he's making a scene." Several customers exchanged uncomfortable glances. Evan slowly pushed himself upright. He didn't answer. He didn't glare. He didn't even look at Gavin. Instead, his eyes locked onto Lena Ortiz. The young barista stood beside the espresso system with one hand hovering uncertainly over the control panel. Because of her hearing loss, she hadn't caught every word flying across the room. She looked from Gavin to Evan, waiting for someone she trusted. Then Evan noticed it. Not the flashing indicator, not the display. Something else. His gaze dropped to the stainless steel housing beneath the espresso system. The vibration running through the metal frame had changed, almost imperceptibly, almost silently. His expression hardened. "Lena." She immediately looked at him. He lifted both hands. "Stop." The sign was calm, clear, immediate. Confusion crossed Gavin's face. "What are you doing?" he snapped. Evan was already moving. He crossed between Lena and the machine in 3 quick steps, ignoring Gavin completely. His hand struck the emergency shutoff switch with practiced precision. The deep mechanical hum vanished. Every grinder, every pump, every hiss of steam, gone. The sudden silence felt unnatural. Customers stared over their coffee cups. Someone near the register whispered, "Why did he shut everything down?" Evan turned toward the room instead of answering Gavin. "Everyone," he said, his voice steady but urgent. "Please move away from the espresso station. Head toward the front doors. Take your drinks if they're already in your hands, but don't wait for new orders." No shouting, no panic, just quiet certainty. Lena watched his hands again. He signed another message. "Come with me. Stay back." She obeyed without hesitation. Sadie had already left her chair. She took one step toward her father before he raised a single finger. "Not now. Stay there." She understood immediately. Naomi watched the entire exchange without saying a word. Gavin's face flushed. "You've got some nerve," he barked. "You think you can walk into my store and shut down operations in front of the CEO?" Evan finally met his eyes. Only for a second. "You need everyone away from that machine." Nothing more, No explanation, no accusation, just certainty. The cafe remained perfectly still. Nobody seemed willing to move until Naomi quietly said, "Let's give him the space he's asking for." One by one, customers stepped backward. The room felt strangely suspended, as if everyone were waiting for an answer to a question nobody knew how to ask. Gavin folded his arms. "This is ridiculous." Evan never looked away from the silent espresso system. Something wasn't right. He knew it. The only question was whether he had realized it soon enough. For one endless second, nobody moved. The only sound left inside the cafe was the soft patter of rain tapping against the front windows. Naomi Calder slowly stepped away from the entrance. "Mr. Brooks," she said calmly, "tell me exactly why you stopped the equipment." Evan didn't answer immediately. He never took his eyes off the stainless steel housing beneath the espresso station. "It changed." Gavin let out a sarcastic laugh. "It changed. That's your professional explanation?" Evan knelt beside the machine without touching it. "The vibration." Naomi exchanged a glance with her quality control specialist. "What about it?" she asked. "It was cycling evenly a minute ago." Evan spoke quietly, almost to himself. "Now it's pulsing." Gavin threw his hands into the air. "Nobody can hear that." "I didn't hear it." That answer caught Naomi off guard. Evan finally looked up. "I felt it." His fingertips rested lightly against the metal counter. "The rhythm isn't matching the pressure cycle anymore." Several customers looked at one another, unsure whether they were watching an argument or a technical inspection. Near the doorway, Sadie hugged her backpack tightly. She had seen that look before. Whenever her father became completely still, it meant his mind was moving faster than anyone around him realized. Naomi glanced toward her quality control specialist. "Can you verify what he's describing?" The man took 2 cautious steps toward the machine before stopping. "I'd rather inspect it after we know why he believed it was unsafe." Before anyone could continue, Lena suddenly tugged gently on Evan's sleeve. She signed a short question. "Safe now?" Evan answered with 2 slow motions. "Not yet. Stay back." Naomi watched the exchange carefully. "You know sign language?" Before Evan could answer, Gavin cut in. "He wastes everyone's time teaching hand signals instead of finishing inspections." Lena lowered her eyes. Evan ignored the remark. "She deserves instructions she can actually understand." The sentence hung in the silent cafe longer than anyone expected. Even Gavin didn't interrupt this time. Naomi's expression softened, almost imperceptibly, before she returned to business. "Mr. Brooks," she said. "Were you hired for today's inspection?" "Yes." "And did someone authorize this shutdown?" "I did." "So you're accepting responsibility?" "I already have." No hesitation, no attempt to shift blame, just 4 simple words. Gavin stepped closer. "He's leaving out one important detail." Naomi turned toward him. "He has been delaying this project since early this morning." Evan finally stood. "I requested a temporary stop." "You locked our equipment." "I secured equipment that shouldn't have been running." "You have no proof." Evan looked toward the espresso system again. "Not yet." That answer irritated Gavin even more. He pointed toward the scattered tools still lying across the floor. "Look around. Customers are leaving. Employees are standing around doing nothing. This entire store is losing money because one contractor wants to play hero." Several guests quietly picked up their drinks, but none of them walked back toward the counter. Something about Evan's calm certainty made even strangers hesitate. Naomi noticed it. She also noticed something else. Every few seconds, Evan glanced toward the lower left corner of the machine instead of its digital display, as though whatever worried him wasn't showing up on a screen at all. The quality control specialist followed Evan's line of sight, his eyebrows slowly narrowed. "There," he murmured. "What?" Naomi asked. He didn't answer immediately. Instead, He leaned forward just enough to study the lower housing without crossing the safety line Evan had established. Then his expression changed, only slightly, but enough for Naomi to notice. "What are you seeing?" she asked. Before he could respond, a sharp metallic click echoed from somewhere deep inside the machine, no louder than someone snapping a pen. Yet Evan's shoulders stiffened instantly. His eyes widened for the first time. "Everyone." His voice remained calm, but it carried an urgency that silenced every whisper in the room. "Take 3 more steps back." Nobody argued. Not because Evan had raised his voice, not because Naomi Calder was standing there, but because something in Evan's face told everyone this was no longer about coffee. It was about coming home safely. The room held its breath. Then, 6 hours earlier, a pale blue dawn stretched over Dayton as freight trucks rumbled along Interstate 75. Their small rental house sat just a few blocks away, tucked between aging brick duplexes where porch lights stayed on until sunrise. Evan Brooks was already awake. The smell of butter and toast drifted through the tiny kitchen, while eggs sizzled in a worn cast-iron skillet. A lunchbox sat open beside 2 neatly packed apples and a peanut butter sandwich. "Breakfast is almost ready," he called. A sleepy voice answered from the hallway. "I'm coming." Sadie appeared wearing oversized socks and one of her mother's old flannel shirts that hung almost to her knees. Before she reached the table, she removed her hearing aids and carefully replaced the batteries, following the routine her father had taught her years ago. Evan watched without saying anything. She caught him looking. "What?" "You get faster every week." She smiled. "I had a good teacher." He slid a plate toward her. "Eat while it's hot." For a few quiet minutes, the only sounds in the house were forks against ceramic plates and the distant hum of traffic outside. Then Sadie's eyes stopped on an envelope lying beside Evan's coffee mug. The logo on the corner belonged to the hearing clinic. She looked up. "Dad, is this another bill?" Evan reached over and casually turned the envelope upside down. "Just paperwork." "It doesn't look like paperwork. It's handled." She studied him for another second. "You always say that." He forced a grin. "And I'm usually right." She wanted to believe him. Instead, she quietly took another bite of eggs. After breakfast, Evan carried his heavy inspection bag to the kitchen table. He checked his pressure gauge, flashlight, inspection tablet, and lockout tags one last time. Something was missing. Before he could remember what it was, Sadie disappeared into her bedroom and came back carrying a small sewing kit. "Hold still," he laughed. "What are you fixing now?" "The patch." She pointed at the side of his tool bag. The red fabric ear had begun pulling away at one corner after years of daily use. It wasn't expensive, just a scrap of cloth cut from one of her mother's winter coats after it had become too worn to donate. Across the center, stitched in white thread, were 2 simple words. "Look first." Sadie threaded the needle with practiced hands. "You know," Evan said softly, "I could buy another patch." She shook her head without looking up. "No." "Why not?" "Because Mom made this one." Silence settled over the room. After a few careful stitches, she tied the knot and smoothed the fabric flat with her thumb. "There." Evan lifted the bag onto his shoulder. "Good as new." Sadie smiled, but only for a moment. Then she asked the question that lingered in the kitchen long after the dishes had been washed. "Dad," he turned, "what if somebody offered you a lot of money?" She hesitated. "Just to sign something you knew wasn't true?" Evan didn't answer immediately. He simply looked at the red patch resting against his side. Then he smiled gently. "I'd rather come home with less money than with something I couldn't explain to you." Sadie nodded. Neither of them realized that before the morning was over, that answer would be tested. Sadie nodded. Neither of them realized that before the morning was over, that answer would be tested. The rain had eased into a fine mist by the time Evan pulled his aging pickup behind Briar and Bean Coffee. The rear service entrance faced a narrow loading alley where delivery trucks left fresh milk, coffee beans, and bakery boxes before sunrise. Neon from a nearby pharmacy reflected across the wet pavement as he climbed out with his tool bag slung over one shoulder. The red patch reading, "Look First," brushed against his jacket with every step. Joe Ellis, the store manager, was unlocking the back door. "You made good time," she said with a tired smile. "I figured we'd finish before the breakfast crowd." "I hope so." Something in her voice didn't match the words. Inside, the cafe was quiet, except for refrigerators humming and the distant drip of freshly cleaned equipment drying overnight. Chairs were still upside down on tables. The rich smell of roasted coffee hadn't yet overpowered the faint scent of detergent from the night crew. Joe handed him the work order. Regional office said the espresso system had a pressure fluctuation yesterday afternoon. A small fluctuation? That's what they told me. Evan nodded and walked toward the stainless steel equipment. He didn't rush. Experience had taught him that machines often revealed problems before anyone touched a tool. He crouched beside the main housing. One glance, then another. His expression changed. He reached into his pocket, pulled out a flashlight, and aimed it beneath the lower access panel. The tamper seal caught the beam. He read the serial number once, then again. His notebook came out immediately. "Joe," she looked over. "When was this unit serviced?" "Last night." "By who?" "I'm not sure. Gavin brought in another contractor after closing." Evan kept staring at the seal. "It should have been replaced after service." Joe frowned. "Wasn't it?" He slowly stood. "The paperwork says this machine still has seal A412. He pointed his flashlight. "This is A417. Joe blinked. "Does that matter?" "It matters enough that someone changed something after the original inspection." Neither of them spoke for several seconds. Evan removed the lower cover just far enough to inspect the emergency shutoff assembly. Another detail stopped him cold. The automatic safety mechanism had been switched to manual override. It wasn't damaged. It had been intentionally changed. His breathing slowed. "Who has access to this compartment?" Joe folded her arms uneasily. "Regional management, maintenance supervisors, and whoever Gavin brings in." Evan carefully photographed the seal, the override position, and the identification plate from 3 different angles. Then he connected his pressure gauge. The numbers climbed, paused, dropped, climbed again. Not enough to trigger an alarm. Enough to bother him. He watched 3 complete cycles before disconnecting the instrument. "This isn't normal," he murmured. "What does it mean?" Joe asked. "It means I don't know whether the problem is mechanical." He looked once more at the mismatched seal, or whether someone is trying to make it look mechanical. Joe's face lost what little color remained. "You think somebody tampered with it?" "I think somebody wants today's inspection finished quickly." He reached into his tool bag and removed a bright red lockout tag. With deliberate movements, he secured the emergency isolation point and attached the tag where it couldn't be missed. "Do not operate under safety inspection." Joe swallowed. "Gavin isn't going to like that." Evan clipped a copy of the inspection notice onto his tablet and pressed send. The stop work order uploaded to the company's digital archive. Time stamped. Permanent. He looked at the confirmation screen for only a moment before slipping the tablet back into his bag. "If everything checks out," he said calmly, "I'll remove it myself." "And if it doesn't?" Evan rested his hand on the worn tool bag with the red patch sewn into its side. "Then nobody starts this machine today." Outside, the first customer pulled into the parking lot. Inside, neither of them noticed the black SUV turning slowly into the alley behind the cafe. Gavin Price had arrived much earlier than expected. He stepped out carrying a leather portfolio instead of a toolbox. His polished shoes barely touched the wet pavement before he glanced at his watch. "Morning," he called as he entered through the rear door. Joe forced a smile. "You're here early. I like to stay ahead of schedule." His eyes landed immediately on the bright red lockout tag hanging from the espresso system. The smile disappeared. "What is this?" "Evan placed a temporary stop on the equipment," Joe answered carefully. "He found a few things that need another look." Gavin didn't respond. He simply stared at the tag for several long seconds before turning toward Evan. "You've been here less than an hour." "I've been here long enough." "To shut down my cafe?" "To pause one machine." Gavin folded his arms. "The CEO is inspecting this location today." "I know." "And you're delaying the opening." "I'm delaying the use of equipment that hasn't passed inspection." The words were calm, matter of fact, exactly the kind of answer Gavin seemed to hate. Before he could reply, the back door opened again. A young woman stepped inside wearing a brand new briar and bean apron, still folded sharply from its package. She looked no older than 22. Her name tag read Lena. She smiled nervously at everyone before signing a quiet greeting to Joe. Joe signed back with only a few basic motions. "I'm glad you made it." Lena nodded. Then she noticed Evan studying the orientation packet lying on the counter. Every page was filled with paragraphs of printed emergency procedures. No pictures, no diagrams, no visual instructions. Only one sentence at the bottom mentioned that training videos were available, with audio. Evan frowned. Lena looked at the packet, then at Joe. She signed a question. "Where is the emergency exit procedure?" Joe hesitated. I don't know sign language well enough." Lena smiled politely, pretending it wasn't a problem. She flipped through the pages again. Nothing. Evan quietly walked to his tool bag. He pulled out a stack of blank inspection cards and a black marker. Within minutes, simple drawings began appearing across the white cards. A hand pressing a red emergency button. A pair of feet moving toward an exit. A green check mark beside a gathering point outside. Large arrows, simple symbols. Nothing complicated. Lena watched with growing surprise. When he finished the last card, Evan laid them across the counter in order. Then he signed. "If this button is pressed, leave this way, stay outside until someone tells you it's safe." Lena's face brightened instantly. She repeated the signs to make sure she understood. Evan nodded. "Perfect." Joe looked from the cards to Evan. "You didn't have to do that." "I know." "You're not being paid for training." "No." "So why spend the time?" Evan slipped the marker back into his pocket. "A warning doesn't help much if the person who needs it can't understand it." The sentence lingered in the quiet cafe. Lena carefully gathered the cards as though they were something valuable. She tucked them into the pocket of her apron instead of leaving them on the counter. "I'll keep them with me," she signed. Evan smiled. Good. Neither of them realized those simple hand-drawn cards would matter more than any inspection report before the morning was over. Across the room, Gavin watched the exchange with growing impatience. To him, every minute spent drawing pictures instead of reopening the espresso machine was another minute slipping away. He checked his watch again. The CEO would arrive soon, and he had already decided that the red lockout tag hanging from the machine would not still be there when she did. Gavin slipped his phone back into his jacket after sending a brief text to the regional office. Inspection on schedule. Minor contractor issue. Handling it. He walked toward the espresso station with the confidence of someone accustomed to getting his way. "Evan," he said, forcing a smile that never reached his eyes. "Let's talk privately." Joe quietly gathered a stack of paper cups and drifted toward the front counter, pretending not to listen. Lena busied herself arranging pastries in the display case, though she couldn't help glancing back every few seconds. Evan remained beside the machine. "You can say it here." Gavin sighed dramatically. I was trying to save you some embarrassment. There isn't any. For a moment, Gavin simply studied him. Then he opened the leather portfolio. Inside was a completed inspection report. Every box had already been checked. Every signature line was empty except one. Yours. He placed the clipboard on the counter. I've already spoken with corporate maintenance. Evan didn't touch it. The pressure fluctuation yesterday was insignificant. I disagree. It happens. The safety override doesn't. Gavin ignored the comment. You sign this, I approve today's opening, and everyone gets on with their lives. Evan glanced at the report. It declared the equipment safe for operation. No mention of the mismatched inspection seal. No mention of the manual override. No mention of the abnormal pressure cycle. Only a blank line waiting for his name. Gavin lowered his voice. I know about your daughter. Evan's expression didn't change. The hearing clinic. Silence. I know those devices aren't cheap. Joe slowly looked up. Gavin continued. Sign this report and your invoice gets processed today. No delays. No questions. He tapped the paper lightly. You'll have the money before the clinic's deadline. For the first time that morning, Evan looked away from the machine. His eyes drifted toward the front windows. Outside, Sadie sat inside the pickup truck finishing homework while waiting for school to start. She couldn't hear the conversation through the glass, but every few minutes she smiled when she caught her father's eye. Gavin noticed. A man has responsibilities. So do I. Then act like it. The words landed harder than the shove would later that morning. You don't need to be a hero. I'm not trying to be. You're trying to be right. Evan looked back at the inspection report. No. His voice was almost gentle. I'm trying to make sure everyone goes home tonight. Gavin's smile vanished. You think one coffee machine is worth risking your daughter's treatment? Evan reached for the clipboard. For a brief second, Gavin thought he had won. Instead, Evan flipped to the last page. He read every line. Then, he calmly placed it back on the counter. I won't sign something I know isn't true. You'd throw away that money? I'd lose something far more expensive if I didn't. Without another word, Evan picked up his inspection tablet. He opened the safety application and uploaded the temporary stop work order directly into the company's permanent compliance archive. A green confirmation appeared across the screen. Order filed successfully. Time, date, GPS location, digital signature. Impossible to erase without leaving a record. Gavin stared at the screen. You actually filed it? I already told you I would. The regional manager's jaw tightened. You've just made this much harder than it needed to be. Evan slipped the tablet back into his tool bag. The equipment decides whether this is easy. No. Gavin took one slow step closer. You do. The tension between them settled over the quiet cafe like another storm cloud gathering outside. Neither man noticed Lena watching from across the room. She couldn't hear their voices, but she could read enough from their faces to understand one thing. Whatever happened next wouldn't end with a signature. The first customers began filtering through the front doors as the open sign flickered to life. Fresh coffee was ready. Pastries filled the display case. Everything looked normal. Only the silent espresso station broke the illusion. Gavin watched the growing line with mounting frustration. Every minute the machine remained idle meant another delay. Another question he would have to answer when Naomi Calder arrived. He stepped into the hallway near the stockroom and pulled out his phone. This is Gavin, he said in a low voice. The contractor is overreacting. He's dragging out a routine inspection to justify extra hours. Don't worry. I'll have this handled before the CEO gets here. He ended the call before anyone could respond. When he turned around, Evan was loading another pressure meter from his truck. Perfect. Without hesitation, Gavin walked straight to the espresso system. His hand reached for the bright red lockout tag. He looked once over his shoulder. Joe saw him. "So, you're taking it off?" she asked carefully. "It shouldn't have been there in the first place." "Gavin," he filed the stop work order. "And I'm the regional operations manager." With one quick motion, he removed the lockout device from the emergency isolation point. The red tag disappeared into his jacket pocket. Joe's stomach tightened. "You shouldn't do that." "I just did." At that moment, Lena stepped out from the break room carrying fresh milk containers. She immediately noticed the missing tag. Her eyes widened. She looked at Gavin, then at the machine. Then she signed the question every employee should have been asking. Inspection finished? Gavin didn't understand the signs. Instead, he pointed directly at the control panel. "Turn it on." Lena hesitated. She signed again, more slowly. Mr. Brooks said, "Wait." "I don't care what he said." He walked closer until they stood only a few feet apart. "You're on probation." She lowered her hands. "If you want to keep working here," Gavin continued, speaking slowly as though volume could replace understanding, "start the machine." Joe stepped forward. "Gavin." He cut her off without looking away from Lena. "We have customers waiting." Lena glanced toward the front windows. Outside, Evan was removing another instrument from the back of his pickup. He couldn't see inside. She slipped one hand into the pocket of her apron. Her fingers found the stack of hand-drawn safety cards Evan had made only minutes earlier. She pulled out the first one, a simple drawing of a red emergency stop button. Underneath it, in thick black marker, Evan had written only 3 words: "Wait for clearance." She stared at the card, then looked back at Gavin. He sighed impatiently. "Enough." His finger jabbed toward the switch again. "Do it." Joe felt her pulse racing. If she spoke up, she might lose the job that provided health insurance for her son. If she stayed silent, she looked at Lena. Fear filled the young woman's face, not because she didn't understand, because she understood perfectly. Lena quietly slipped the card back into her apron instead of throwing it away. Then she took one small step backward from the machine. She wasn't refusing. She simply wasn't moving forward. Outside, Evan closed the tailgate of his truck and started walking back toward the cafe. Inside, Gavin heard the back door open. He quickly slid the red lockout tag deeper into his pocket. By the time Evan stepped inside, carrying the additional pressure gauge, the warning tag had vanished. At almost the exact same moment, a black sedan rolled into the front parking lot. Naomi Calder had arrived. She stepped onto the sidewalk with the quiet confidence of someone used to visiting stores without warning. Beside her walked Breyer and Bean's Human Resources Director, Melissa Harper, and Senior Quality Control Specialist Daniel Ross. None of them carried coffee cups. They carried notebooks. Naomi believed the first 15 minutes inside a store usually revealed more than a week's worth of reports. As the front doors opened, warm air carrying the scent of fresh pastries drifted into the cool morning. Customers smiled politely. Employees straightened their aprons. Everything looked exactly the way a flagship cafe should. Everything except one silent espresso station. Before Naomi could ask a question, Gavin was already walking toward her. "Good morning, Naomi." "Morning, Gavin." "I'm sorry you arrived in the middle of a delay." She glanced toward the idle machine. "What happened?" "A contractor decided to shut down equipment over a minor fluctuation." Gavin gave a disappointed smile. "We're working through it." He lowered his voice just enough to sound reasonable. "I appreciate people who take safety seriously, but sometimes experience makes people overly cautious." Naomi nodded without committing herself. Her attention shifted across the room. She noticed an older man in a faded work jacket kneeling beside a pressure gauge. A little girl quietly doing homework near the window. A young barista watching both of them instead of preparing drinks. Nobody looked relaxed. "Which one is the contractor?" Naomi asked. Gavin pointed toward Evan. "Him." Evan stood as Naomi approached. He wiped his hands on a clean shop towel before offering a polite handshake. "Ma'am." "Mr. Brooks." "You're the inspector?" "Independent contractor." Naomi looked down at the pressure gauge still connected to the machine. "I've been told this delay may not be necessary." Evan answered carefully. "I believe it is." She waited for more. He didn't volunteer a speech. No dramatic accusations, only facts. "I found a mismatched inspection seal." Daniel Ross immediately looked interested. "A mismatched seal?" Evan nodded. "And the automatic emergency shutoff was switched to manual." Daniel made a quick note. Before he could ask another question, Gavin stepped in. "The previous contractor already checked all of that." Evan turned toward him. "Then why doesn't the paperwork match the machine?" For the first time, Gavin hesitated. Only for a heartbeat. Long enough for Naomi to notice. Still, she remained neutral. She had learned years ago that confident people could be wrong, and quiet people could be right. The evidence mattered more than personalities. While Daniel examined the inspection documents, Naomi slowly walked around the espresso station. She wasn't studying the machine. She was watching people. Lena never took her eyes off Evan. Joe looked nervous every time Gavin spoke. Customers seemed more willing to trust the man in the worn work jacket than the regional manager in the tailored suit. Then Naomi noticed something else. Every few moments, before any gauge changed or indicator flashed, Evan instinctively looked toward the lower housing beneath the machine, almost as if he expected it to speak before the instruments did. "What are you looking at?" Naomi asked. "The vibration. You can read that?" "I've worked around systems like this for 20 years. But nothing's making any unusual noise." "It doesn't have to." Daniel glanced down. "I'd like to hear more about that." Before Evan could answer, Gavin abruptly clapped his hands together. "We've spent enough time discussing theories." He turned toward Lena. "Go ahead." She stared at him. He pointed directly at the control panel. "Restart the espresso system." Lena didn't move. Instead, she looked at Evan. She never touched the control panel. For a brief moment, the entire cafe seemed suspended between two decisions. Gavin's patience snapped. "I gave you an instruction." Lena's eyes remained on Evan. He lifted one hand just enough for her to see. Not safe. She understood immediately and stepped back from the machine. Gavin let out an irritated breath. "This is unbelievable." He pointed toward Evan. "You've turned a coffee shop into a sign language class." Evan answered without raising his voice. "No." He looked at Lena before turning back to Gavin. "I've made sure she understands the same warning everyone else deserves." Naomi watched the exchange carefully. Daniel Ross glanced from the control panel to Evan, then to the pressure gauge that still rested against the side of the machine. The numbers were changing, only slightly, but they were changing. Gavin noticed everyone's attention drifting away from him. He couldn't allow that, not today, not with the CEO standing 10 feet away. He stepped directly into Evan's path. "You've wasted enough of my time." "I don't work for your schedule. You work on my property." "I work under safety law." The words landed like stones. Several customers had quietly stopped pretending to drink their coffee. Even the cashier remained frozen behind the register. Gavin leaned closer. "You think you're smarter than everyone here?" "No." "You think you're the only one who cares about safety?" "I think this machine isn't ready." "You have no proof." "I have enough not to gamble with people." The answer was calm. Too calm. It only fueled Gavin's anger. Without warning, he grabbed Evan by the shoulder and shoved him backward. The movement wasn't violent enough to knock him to the floor, but it sent him crashing into the edge of a wooden table. His tool bag slipped free. Metal tools scattered across the polished floor. The red fabric patch stitched to the side caught against a chair leg. One corner ripped loose. Sadie gasped. "Dad!" She took one step forward before stopping herself. Across the room, Lena instinctively moved toward Evan. He immediately shook his head. No. His eyes weren't on Gavin. They weren't on Naomi. They weren't even on the torn patch lying against the floor. They were fixed on the lower housing beneath the espresso system. Something had changed. The faint vibration running through the stainless steel frame was no longer steady. It was accelerating. A rapid pulse. Barely visible. Almost impossible to notice unless someone had spent years reading machines the way other people read faces. Evan's expression changed instantly. Lena. His hands moved. Back. Now. She obeyed without hesitation. Daniel frowned. What is it? Evan didn't answer. He crossed the distance to the machine in 3 quick strides. His hand struck the emergency shut-off. The deep mechanical hum disappeared. Every grinder, every pump, every hiss of steam. Silence flooded the cafe. Evan turned toward the customers. Please move away from this side of the room. His voice remained steady. No running. Just keep moving toward the front entrance. People obeyed almost automatically. Sadie grabbed the stack of hand-drawn safety cards from Lena's apron pocket. Without being asked, she began showing the simple pictures to 2 elderly customers who looked confused, pointing them calmly toward the exit. Lena mirrored the same directions in sign language for another employee. Naomi watched both girls for a heartbeat before looking back at Evan. No shouting, no panic, no anger over being shoved, only quiet control, only protecting people. As the last customer stepped beyond the safety line, a sharp metallic pop echoed from somewhere inside the espresso system. Every head turned toward the silent machine. Nobody said a word. The metallic pop was followed by a faint hiss that seemed to come from somewhere behind the stainless steel panel. Not loud, not dramatic, but enough to make Daniel Ross instinctively lift a hand, signaling everyone to stay where they were. No one goes near it, he said. Evan nodded. That's exactly right. A few seconds later, the hiss stopped. The room remained unnaturally quiet until Daniel carefully crouched several feet away from the machine. Without touching the housing, he leaned forward to inspect the lower access panel. His eyes narrowed. The pressure relief line, he murmured. Naomi stepped beside him. What do you see? The tubing is bulging. He pointed through a narrow opening in the frame. If this system had continued cycling under load... He didn't finish the sentence. Instead, he slowly stood and looked directly at Naomi. The employee standing here would have been at the highest risk. His finger rested on the spot where Lena had been only moments earlier. Lena stared at the floor. Almost without thinking, she slipped one hand into her apron pocket and touched the stack of hand-drawn safety cards. Sadie quietly moved closer to her father. Evan placed a reassuring hand on her shoulder without taking his eyes off the machine. No one's hurt, he said softly. That's what matters. Naomi exhaled slowly. Daniel, I want this equipment sealed immediately. Before anyone else could respond, Gavin stepped forward. This is being blown completely out of proportion. Daniel looked at him. The tubing failed. It didn't fail. It deformed. Because he shut the machine down in the middle of a cycle. The accusation hung in the room. Several customers looked back toward Evan. Gavin seized the moment. He created the problem. Evan didn't argue. He simply asked one question. If I caused it? He looked toward the warped section of tubing. Why is the damage behind a sealed service panel that hadn't been opened this morning? Gavin hesitated, only for an instant. Then he recovered. You could have tampered with it before anyone arrived. Daniel immediately shook his head. The panel still has factory dust on the upper screws. He looked again, but not on the lower ones. Naomi noticed the change in his expression. What does that mean? It means someone accessed part of this assembly recently. Gavin folded his arms. Or your contractor did. The room fell silent again. Naomi turned toward Evan. You said earlier that you documented everything. I did. Can you prove what you found before the shutdown? Without speaking, Evan unzipped his tool bag. The torn corner of the red Look First patch brushed against his hand. He reached inside and removed his inspection tablet. The screen lit up. Photographs, pressure readings, timestamps, inspection notes. Every file was organized in chronological order. Before he could open the first image, Gavin gave a short, dismissive laugh. Digital files? He shrugged. Those can be edited. Several people glanced uncertainly between the two men. Naomi didn't speak. Neither did Daniel. Evan rested one finger on the tablet without pressing the screen. I expected you to say that. For the first time since the morning began, a faint look of surprise crossed Gavin's face. What does that mean? Evan looked toward Lena, then toward Joe. Finally, back at Naomi. It means the photographs aren't the only evidence. The words settled over the cafe like another layer of silence. Across the room, Joe slowly lowered her eyes. She had been carrying something much heavier than a stack of store keys. She had been carrying the truth. Joe drew a slow breath. Her hands trembled just enough for the metal keyring to chime softly against the register counter. Every eye in the cafe shifted toward her. Gavin spoke first. Joe, there's nothing to explain. His voice was smooth, confident, the kind of confidence that expected obedience. You've got customers waiting. Let's not waste everyone's time. Joe looked at him, then at Lena. The young barista still held one hand against the pocket where Evan's safety cards rested. Finally, Joe looked at Sadie. The little girl stood beside her father, gently smoothing the torn corner of the red Look First patch on his tool bag. Something in that simple gesture broke through the fear Joe had been carrying for months. There is something to explain, she said quietly. The cafe became perfectly still. Naomi folded her notebook shut. You have my attention. Joe swallowed. When Mr. Brooks arrived this morning, he found the inspection seal didn't match the maintenance log. Daniel nodded. That's consistent with what we've seen, Joe continued. He tagged the machine out of service. She looked directly at Gavin. And after he went outside for another gauge, you removed the lockout tag. Gavin laughed once, a short, sharp sound. That's ridiculous. Joe didn't flinch. You took it off yourself. No. You put it in your right jacket pocket. Instinctively, Gavin's hand moved toward that pocket, only for a fraction of a second. It was enough. Naomi noticed. Daniel noticed. Even Gavin realized what he had done. He slowly lowered his hand. You're mistaken. Joe shook her head. I watched you. Silence settled over the room again. Naomi spoke carefully. Mr. Price. She's confused. You interrupted before she finished. Gavin said nothing. Joe continued. You told Lena to restart the machine. Lena looked at Naomi and immediately signed the same sentence. Melissa Harper, the HR director, quietly translated. She says, yes. He instructed her to turn it back on. Naomi's eyebrows lifted. You know American Sign Language? Melissa smiled faintly. My younger brother is deaf. For the first time all morning, Lena realized someone besides Evan understood her completely. She signed again, faster this time. Melissa translated every word. She says, Mister. Brooks warned her to wait. He gave her picture cards. He told her not to restart anything until the inspection was complete. Lena reached into her apron and carefully handed Naomi the stack of laminated cards. The first one showed the bright red emergency stop button. The second showed a hand raised beside the words, Wait for clearance. The third showed an exit route with simple arrows anyone could understand. Naomi studied them quietly. "They're homemade." Evan nodded. "I made them before opening." "Why?" He looked toward Lena. "Because safety instructions only work if people can actually understand them." Nobody spoke, not for several long seconds. Then Daniel looked toward the espresso system again. "Naomi." He pointed beneath the machine. "I think you should see this." He knelt beside the lower service panel and carefully aimed a flashlight through the narrow opening. The bent pressure line was clearly visible now. So was something else. Fresh tool marks. Bright scratches cut across the mounting bolts. Not old, not worn. Fresh. Daniel slowly stood. His expression had completely changed. He turned toward Gavin. "When was the last unauthorized repair performed on this machine?" Gavin opened his mouth. No answer came, because for the first time since Naomi had entered the cafe, the facts were speaking louder than he could. Gavin searched the faces around him, hoping to find someone still willing to believe him. No one spoke. No one rushed to his defense. Daniel Ross remained kneeling beside the espresso system, his flashlight still fixed on the lower assembly. "The wrench marks are fresh," he said. "These bolts were removed recently." He carefully reached through the service opening without disturbing the tubing. "When our maintenance vendors replace this section, they use torque seal paint." He pointed to the empty edge of one bolt. "This paint is missing." Naomi looked closer. "And that means?" "It means someone opened this assembly outside normal maintenance procedure." Silence settled over the room again. Gavin cleared his throat. "Or your contractor did." Daniel slowly shook his head. "The pressure sensor logged its last calibration 3 days ago." He looked directly at Gavin. "The timestamp is stored inside the controller." Evan quietly handed Daniel the inspection tablet. "I photographed the service screen before I touched anything." Daniel compared the image with the controller. Every number matched. Every timestamp matched. Every serial number matched. He nodded once. "The photographs were taken before today's inspection." Gavin's shoulders stiffened. Naomi didn't raise her voice. "Mr. Price," he looked at her. "Did you authorize an undocumented repair?" "No." "Did anyone under your supervision?" "I don't know." "Shouldn't you?" The question landed harder than any accusation. Gavin opened his mouth. Nothing came. Naomi turned toward Melissa. "Please contact corporate compliance." Melissa already had her phone in hand. "I also want security to preserve every camera recording from this location beginning at midnight." Gavin immediately stepped forward. "That isn't necessary." Naomi's eyes met his. "It is now." He felt the room slipping away from him, his carefully rehearsed explanation, his polished confidence, his authority. None of it mattered anymore. Across the cafe, Sadie quietly picked up the last wrench that had rolled beneath a chair after Gavin shoved her father. She wiped it clean with a paper napkin before placing it back into Evan's tool bag. Then she gently pressed the loose corner of the red Look First patch flat against the fabric. "It needs another stitch," she whispered. Evan smiled. "I know. I can fix it tonight." "I'd like that." Naomi watched the exchange without interrupting. There was no performance in it, no attempt to impress anyone, just a father answering his daughter. Then she remembered something. When Gavin shoved Evan, the first thing Evan had done wasn't defend himself. He hadn't argued. He hadn't threatened. He hadn't even looked angry. He had protected Lena. He had evacuated strangers. He had ignored his own pride. Naomi slowly walked toward him. "Mr. Brooks." "Yes, ma'am. I owe you an apology." He looked genuinely surprised. "For what?" "I believed this morning was about an inspection dispute." She glanced around the cafe. "It wasn't." Her eyes rested briefly on Lena, then on Joe, then finally on the silent espresso machine. It was about someone refusing to trade people's safety for convenience. Evan lowered his eyes for a moment. I was just doing my job." "No." Naomi gave a small smile. "You were doing what everyone else's job was supposed to be." Daniel stood from the machine, holding the damaged section of pressure tubing that had just been removed. The metal had split almost all the way through, along one hidden seam. He held it where everyone could see. If this cafe had opened normally this morning. He paused before finishing. Someone standing at the espresso station would almost certainly have been sprayed with superheated water and steam. The room fell completely silent. Lena instinctively reached for the safety cards inside her apron. Then she looked at Evan. This time. And she didn't need him to tell her she was safe. She already knew who had made sure of it. When Sadie quietly promised to sew the torn Look First patch back onto Evan's tool bag, it wasn't just a piece of fabric anymore. It had become a reminder that the people who protect others often leave behind the strongest legacy without ever asking for applause. This story reminds us that real courage isn't measured by the loudest voice in the room, but by the quiet decision to do the right thing when it costs you something. One moment of courage can change far more lives than one moment of fear ever could. The next time you're tempted to stay silent because speaking up feels uncomfortable, remember what Evan chose instead. Your decision to protect one person today could become the reason someone else gets to go home safely tonight. Have you ever had to stand alone because you knew it was the right thing to do? Share your story in the comments. I'd truly love to read it. And if this story stayed with you, don't forget to like and subscribe, because the next story may remind you that the greatest heroes are often the ones nobody notices until everything changes.